The silence of the Oklahoma Territory. Evening shattered when Cade Harrison spotted the abandoned wagon tilted awkwardly against a cottonwood tree just outside Enid, its canvas cover flapping in the hot August wind of 1893. He had been riding fence lines all day, checking cattle for his employer's ranch, and was bone-tired and hungry, but something about that wagon made him pull his horse to a stop. The oxen were gone, probably stolen or wandered off, and there was no movement around the vehicle that would suggest life. But then he heard it, a soft whimper that sounded more animal than human, and his instincts told him to investigate. Cade dismounted carefully, his hand instinctively going to the worn grip of his revolver, though he did not draw it. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of amber and rust. As he approached the wagon, he caught sight of white fabric through the gap in the canvas, and his heart quickened. Someone was definitely inside. "Hello in there," he called out, his voice steady but not threatening. "I mean you no harm. Just passing through and saw your wagon. You need help?" The whimpering stopped abruptly, replaced by a tense silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Then, slowly, a pale hand pushed aside the canvas, and the most haunting pair of green eyes Cade had ever seen stared out at him. The woman who emerged was young, maybe 22 or 23, with auburn hair that had come loose from what must have once been an elaborate arrangement. But it was her dress that caught his attention most, a once beautiful white wedding gown, now stained with dust and what looked like dried blood on the hem. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking with desperation. "Do you have any water, any food at all?" Cade's chest tightened at the sight of her. She was clearly starving, her face gaunt and pale, her lips cracked and dry. Without hesitation, he reached for his saddlebag and pulled out his canteen, along with the wrapped bundle of cornbread and dried beef he had been saving for his own supper. "Here," he said, stepping closer and offering both to her. "Take it, all of it." The woman's eyes filled with tears as she reached for the canteen with trembling hands. She drank deeply, water spilling down her chin and onto her soiled dress, but she did not care. When she finally lowered the canteen, she looked at the food in his other hand as if it were made of gold. "I cannot," she said, though her eyes never left the bundle. "This is your food. You need it too." "Lady, I can get more food back in town. You look like you have not eaten in days." "Please take it." She hesitated for only a moment longer before accepting the food with both hands, as if afraid it might disappear. She ate slowly at first, then with increasing urgency, tears streaming down her face as she consumed the cornbread and beef. Cade stood there watching her, his own hunger forgotten in the face of her obvious need. When she finally finished, she looked up at him with those incredible green eyes, now bright with tears and something else, something deeper. "You fed more than my hunger," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "You fed my hope. I thought I was going to die out here alone." Cade felt something shift inside his chest, a feeling he could not quite name but that warmed him from the inside out. "What happened to you? Where is your husband? You are wearing a wedding dress." The woman's face crumbled and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "There is no husband. There never was. It was supposed to be my wedding day 3 days ago in Kansas. But when I arrived at the church, I found out the man I was supposed to marry had already left town with my dowry money and another woman. He had been lying to me for months, courting me through letters while planning to rob my family blind." "That is low," Cade said, anger flaring in his chest for this woman he did not even know. "What about your family? How did you end up out here alone?" "My parents died last year from influenza. I have been living with my aunt in Wichita, but she made it very clear I was a burden. She arranged the marriage and gave the man my inheritance as a dowry. When he ran off, She blamed me, said I must have done something to drive him away. She told me to leave and never come back. I took the wagon and what little supplies I could gather, thinking I could make it to Enid, where I heard there were opportunities for women to find work. But the oxen broke loose 2 nights ago during a storm, and I have been stranded here ever since, too weak to walk anywhere. Cade's jaw tightened. The injustice of it all, the way this woman had been used and discarded by people who should have protected her, made his blood boil. But right now, anger would not help her. She needed practical assistance. "What is your name?" he asked gently. "Miriam," she replied. "Miriam Parker." "Well, Miriam Parker, my name is Cade Harrison, and I work as a ranch hand for the Circle J Ranch just outside Enid. I am going to get you into town and make sure you have a proper meal and a place to stay tonight. Can you ride?" Miriam looked at his horse, then back at him, uncertainty crossing her features. "I have ridden before, but not well, and I am so weak right now." "Then you will ride with me. My horse is strong enough to carry us both the few miles into town. We need to get you to safety before full dark, and we need to get you some real food and medical attention." "I have no money," Miriam said quietly, shame coloring her voice. "I cannot pay you back for your kindness." "I am not asking you to," Cade replied firmly. "Come on now. Let me help you down from there." He reached up and carefully helped Miriam climb down from the wagon. She was lighter than he expected, and he realized with a pang just how much weight she must have lost in the past few days. She swayed on her feet, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Easy now," he murmured. "I have got you." They made their way to his horse, a solid bay gelding named Copper, who stood patiently waiting. Cade mounted first, then reached down to help Miriam up behind him. She settled awkwardly onto the horse's back, her wedding dress bunching up around her legs in a way that would have been scandalous under normal circumstances. But neither of them cared about propriety right now. She wrapped her arms around his waist, and Cade tried to ignore the way his heart sped up at the contact. "Hold on tight," he told her, and urged Copper into a steady walk toward Enid. The ride into town took about 40 minutes, and by the time they reached the outskirts, full darkness had fallen. Lanterns glowed in windows along the main street, and the sounds of a typical Friday evening drifted through the air. Piano music from the saloon, voices raised in conversation, the occasional bark of a dog. Cade felt Miriam's grip on him tighten as they entered the town, and he wondered what she must be thinking, arriving in a strange place in a ruined wedding dress, dependent on the charity of a cowboy she had just met. He guided Copper toward the boarding house run by Mrs. Adelaide Winters, a kind widow in her 50s who Cade knew had a soft heart for people in difficult circumstances. He had rented a room there himself when he first arrived in Enid 2 years ago, before he earned enough to afford a small cabin on the ranch property. Cade dismounted and helped Miriam down, keeping a supportive arm around her as they approached the front door. He knocked firmly, and after a moment, the door swung open to reveal Mrs. Winters herself, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, her sharp blue eyes taking in the scene before her with one quick, assessing glance. "Cade Harrison," she said, her voice warm but curious. "What brings you to my door at this hour, and who is this young lady, Mrs. Winters? This is Miriam Parker. I found her stranded on the road outside town. She has been without food or water for days, and she needs a place to stay and some help. I was hoping you might have a room available, Mrs. Winters' expression softened immediately as she looked at Miriam, taking in the wedding dress, the gaunt face, the exhaustion in every line of her body. "Oh, you poor dear. Of course I have a room. Come in right now." She ushered them inside quickly, calling out for her assistant, a young woman named Sarah who helped with the cooking and cleaning. Within minutes, Miriam was seated at the kitchen table with a bowl of warm beef stew and fresh bread in front of her, while Mrs. Winters fussed over her and Sarah heated water for a bath. Cade stood near the doorway, suddenly feeling out of place in the domestic scene. He had done what needed to be done, gotten Miriam to safety, but now he was not sure what to do with himself. He should probably head back to the ranch. It was getting late and he had work in the morning. Cade, Miriam's voice stopped him as he turned toward the door. She had risen from her chair, leaving the half-eaten stew behind, and crossed the room to stand before him. "Thank you. I do not have the words to properly express what you have done for me tonight. You saved my life." "Anyone would have done the same," he said, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "No," she said firmly, reaching out to touch his arm. "Not anyone. Most people would have ridden past that wagon without a second thought. You stopped. You gave me your only food, your water. You brought me here and made sure I was safe. That is not nothing, Cade Harrison. That is everything." He looked down into her eyes and felt that strange stirring in his chest again, stronger this time. There was something about Miriam Parker that reached right into him and took hold. Maybe it was the vulnerability in her eyes, or the strength he could see beneath the exhaustion, the determination that had kept her alive through days of suffering. Or maybe it was simply that, when she looked at him, he felt seen in a way he had not felt in a long time. "You get some rest," he said softly. "Build your strength back up. Mrs. Winters will take good care of you. Will I see you again?" The question was almost shy, and it surprised him. "I will come by tomorrow to check on you if that is all right." The smile that spread across Miriam's face was like sunrise after a long night. "I would like that very much." Cade nodded, tipped his hat to Mrs. Winters and Sarah, and made his way out into the night. As he mounted Copper and turned toward the ranch, he could not stop thinking about green eyes and the feel of Miriam's arms around his waist during the ride into town. He had been alone for so long, focused entirely on his work and saving money, that he had forgotten what it felt like to connect with someone. But tonight, something had shifted, and he suspected his life was about to become much more complicated. True to his word, Cade returned to the boarding house the next afternoon, after finishing his morning chores at the ranch. He had washed up and changed into his better shirt, the blue one without any tears or permanent stains, and he had even attempted to tame his dark hair, though it stubbornly fell across his forehead no matter what he did. He felt nervous, which was ridiculous. He was just checking on someone he had helped, making sure she was all right. It did not mean anything, except it did, and he knew it. Mrs. Winters answered his knock with a knowing smile that made him feel like a schoolboy. "She is in the parlor, Cade. Go on in. I will bring some lemonade." Cade found Miriam seated in a chair by the window, wearing a simple pale green dress that Mrs. Winters must have loaned her. Her hair was clean and pulled back in a loose braid, and there was more color in her cheeks than there had been the night before. She looked up when he entered, and her face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Cade," she said, rising to her feet, "you came. I said I would." He crossed the room to stand near her, suddenly unsure what to do with his hands. "You look much better today. How are you feeling?" "Like a human being again, thanks to you and Mrs. Winters. I slept for 12 hours straight, had 2 baths, and have eaten more food in the past day than I had in the previous week. Mrs. Winters has been incredibly kind. She says I can stay here as long as I need, and she might even have some work for me helping around the boarding house to earn my keep." "That is wonderful," Cade said, and meant it. The relief he felt knowing Miriam would be taken care of was more intense than he expected. "Mrs. Winters is good people. You will be in good hands with her." They sat down together as Mrs. Winters brought in the promised lemonade, along with a plate of cookies. She left them alone with another one of those knowing smiles, and Cade felt his ears heat up. "Tell me about yourself," Miriam said, settling back in her chair and looking at him with open curiosity. "All I know is that you are a ranch hand with a kind heart. That seems like too little information about the man who saved my life." Cade shrugged, uncomfortable talking about himself. "Not much to tell, really. I am 26 years old, been working at the Circle J for 2 years now. Before that, I drifted around doing odd jobs on various ranches in Kansas and Nebraska. My parents had a small farm in Missouri, but they lost it when I was 18. My father took to drinking after that, and my mother died of heartbreak, I think, though the doctor said it was pneumonia. My father passed a year later. I have been on my own ever since." "I am sorry," Miriam said softly. "That must have been very difficult." "It was a long time ago," Cade replied, though the old pain still lingered in the corners of his heart. "What about you? You told me about your parents and your aunt, but what were your plans? What did you want to do with your life before everything fell apart?" Miriam's expression turned wistful. "I wanted to teach. I love children, and I love books, and teaching seemed like the perfect combination of both. But women teachers have to be unmarried in most places, and my aunt was determined to marry me off. She said teaching was not a proper ambition for a lady of good family. When she arranged the marriage to Mr. Thomas Garrett, I thought maybe it would not be so bad. His letters were charming, and he promised me we would have a good life together. I should have known it was too good to be true." The bitterness in her voice made Cade angry all over again at the man who had hurt her. "You will find your way," he said firmly. "You are smart and strong. Anyone can see that. What that man did to you was wrong, but it does not define who you are or what you can become." Miriam looked at him with such intensity that it made his breath catch. "How is it that you, a man I just met, can see that when my own family could not? Maybe they were too close to see clearly, or maybe they just were not looking." He held her gaze, feeling something pass between them, a recognition, an understanding that went deeper than words. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, sharing stories about their lives, their dreams, their disappointments. Cade found himself opening up in ways he rarely did, telling Miriam about his hopes of one day owning his own small ranch, about how he had been saving every penny toward that goal. Miriam told him about the books she loved, about how she had secretly taught some of the poorer children in her aunt's town to read, against her aunt's wishes. By the time Cade reluctantly said he needed to get back to the ranch, the sun was beginning to set, and he felt like he had known Miriam Parker his entire life. There was an ease between them, a comfort that usually took months or years to develop, not hours. "Can I see you again tomorrow?" he asked as he stood to leave. "I have Sunday off. I thought maybe I could show you around Enid if you are feeling up to it." "I would love that," Miriam replied, walking him to the door. "Thank you for coming today, Cade. It means more than you know." That night, lying in his narrow bed in the small cabin on the ranch, Cade stared at the ceiling and replayed every moment of the day, every word Miriam had said, every smile she had given him. He was in dangerous territory here, falling for a woman he barely knew, a woman who had just escaped a terrible situation and probably needed time to heal, not a cowboy complicating her life. But his heart did not seem to care about logic or reason. His heart had already made up its mind. Sunday dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for showing Miriam around town. Cade arrived at the boarding house mid-morning to find her waiting for him on the front porch, wearing the same borrowed green dress and looking nervous and excited at the same time. "Ready?" he asked, offering her his arm. "Ready," she confirmed, slipping her hand through his elbow. They walked through Enid together, Cade pointing out the various businesses and landmarks. The general store where he bought his supplies, the church where services were held every Sunday, the schoolhouse that currently sat empty because the last teacher had married and moved away. At that, Miriam stopped walking and stared at the small wooden building with such longing that Cade's heart ached for her. "Maybe you could teach there," he suggested quietly. "The town has been looking for a new teacher for months." "But I am not certified," Miriam said. "I never finished my training. My aunt pulled me out of the teaching college after only 1 year, said it was a waste of money." "Does not mean you could not do the job. You clearly love learning and children. That is more than most teachers have. Maybe you should talk to the town council about it." Miriam turned to look at him with wonder in her eyes. "Do you really think they might consider me?" "I think it is worth asking. Worst they can say is no, but at least then you would know. And from what I have seen, Miriam Parker, you are not someone who gives up easily." She squeezed his arm and they continued their walk, eventually ending up at the edge of town where a small creek flowed through a grove of trees. It was a peaceful spot, shaded and cool, and they sat down on the grassy bank to rest. "Can I ask you something?" Miriam said after a few minutes of comfortable silence. "Anything." "Why did you stop that night when you saw my wagon? Really? You said you were tired and hungry and just wanted to get home. What made you stop?" Cade thought about it carefully before answering. "I do not know exactly. Something just felt wrong about that scene. A wagon sitting there all alone like that. I have ridden past plenty of things in my life, minded my own business like most people do. But that night, something told me to stop, to check. I am glad I listened to that feeling." "So am I," Miriam said softly. "I had given up, you know. That afternoon before you found me, I had decided I was probably going to die there. I was too weak to walk anywhere, and nobody had passed by in almost 2 days. I had made my peace with it. And then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I did not even know I was praying." "You are not going to die," Cade said fiercely. "Not for a long time if I have anything to say about it." Miriam smiled at him and then, to his surprise, she leaned over and kissed his cheek. It was quick and light, barely more than a brush of her lips against his skin, but it sent electricity shooting through his entire body. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Cade turned toward her and suddenly they were very close, her green eyes wide and searching. He could smell the lavender soap she had used to wash her hair, could see the faint dusting of freckles across her nose. His hand came up almost of its own accord to cup her cheek, and she leaned into the touch like a flower turning toward the sun. "Miriam," he breathed. And then he was kissing her, really kissing her, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was both gentle and desperate, tender and passionate. She made a small sound in the back of her throat and kissed him back, her hands coming up to grip his shirt as if she needed to anchor herself to him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cade rested his forehead against hers. "I should not have done that," he said, though he could not bring himself to sound sorry about it. "You have been through so much, and I do not want to take advantage." "You are not taking advantage," Miriam said firmly. "I wanted you to kiss me. I have wanted that since yesterday, if I am being honest. I know it is too soon. I know I should probably be more careful with my heart after what Thomas did to me, but Cade, when I am with you, I feel safe. I feel seen. I feel like maybe everything I went through was leading me to that wagon, to you finding me." "I feel the same way," Cade admitted, "like I have been waiting my whole life for you without knowing it." They sat there by the creek for hours, talking and kissing and making plans for a future that was still uncertain, but felt full of possibility. Cade told her more about his dream of owning land, about how he had almost saved enough for a down payment on a small property he had his eye on just west of Enid. Miriam talked about her teaching dreams, about how maybe, just maybe, this could be the fresh start she needed. As the afternoon wore on and they reluctantly made their way back toward town, Cade felt a sense of contentment he had not experienced in years. Yes, it was fast. Yes, they barely knew each other. But sometimes, he figured, the heart knows things the head has not figured out yet. And his heart was telling him that Miriam Parker was meant to be his. The next few weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing affection. Cade continued his work at the Circle J Ranch, rising before dawn to tend cattle, mend fences, and do the 100 other tasks that filled a cowboy's day. But every spare moment, every evening and Sunday off, he spent with Miriam. She, meanwhile, had taken his advice to heart and approached the town council about the teaching position. To her amazed delight, they hired her on the spot. So desperate were they for someone educated and willing to take on the town's 30-odd children. The fact that she was not officially certified was overlooked in favor of her obvious passion for teaching and her excellent references from the teaching college she had briefly attended. Miriam threw herself into preparing for the school year, which would begin in September. Mrs. Winters helped her sew 2 new dresses suitable for teaching, and the town council provided a small salary plus room and board. Cade helped her clean and organize the schoolhouse, spending an entire Sunday repairing broken desks and replacing the window that had been cracked by a storm. Working alongside each other in the quiet schoolhouse, they fell into an easy rhythm. Miriam would direct, and Cade would lift or hammer or fix whatever needed attention. They talked constantly about everything and nothing, learning each other's quirks and habits and dreams. "My students start next week," Miriam said one evening as they sat on the schoolhouse steps watching the sunset. "I am terrified." "You are going to be wonderful," Cade assured her, taking her hand in his. "Those kids are lucky to have you. What if I fail? What if I am not good enough?" "Miriam, you survived being abandoned with no food or water. You survived losing your parents and being cast out by your aunt. You survived having your heart broken and your trust betrayed. Teaching some children their letters and numbers is going to be easy compared to all that." She laughed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You always know what to say to make me feel better." "It is a gift," he teased, and she poked him in the ribs, making him grunt. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Cade took a deep breath. He had been thinking about this for days, wondering if it was too soon, if he was being foolish. But life was short and uncertain, and he had learned that sometimes you had to take chances. "Miriam, I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I need you to know something. I am in love with you. I think I have been since the moment I saw you in that wagon, so fierce and determined to survive even when you thought you were dying. I love your strength, your kindness, your brilliant mind, and your beautiful heart. I love the way you laugh and the way you get excited when you talk about books. I love everything about you, and I need you to know that." Miriam lifted her head from his shoulder to look at him, tears shimmering in her green eyes. "Oh, Cade, I love you too. I was afraid to say it, afraid it was too fast, but I cannot deny it anymore. I love you with everything I am." He kissed her then, pouring all of his feelings into that kiss, and she responded with equal passion. When they finally broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. "I want to marry you," Cade said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I know that is probably the last thing you want to hear after what happened with Thomas, and I know I do not have much to offer you right now, but I am working on that. I am saving money, and I am going to buy that land, and I am going to build us a home. I promise you, Miriam, I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." Miriam was crying openly now, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you, Cade Harrison. I do not care about money or a fancy house. I care about you, about the man who stopped when others would not have, who gave me his food when he was hungry too, who saw me at my worst and still thought I was worth saving. That is the man I want to spend my life with." They sealed their engagement with another kiss, and then another, until they were both breathless and dizzy with joy. They made plans to marry in the spring, giving Miriam time to finish her first school year and Cade time to finalize the purchase of the land he wanted. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Enid, and the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Mrs. Winters cried happy tears and insisted on hosting a small engagement party at the boarding house. The ranch owner, Mr. Jacob Murphy, surprised Cade by offering him a raise and a promise of help building a house on his new land. Even the townspeople who barely knew Miriam were happy for her, having heard the story of how Cade found her and saved her life. The only person who tried to cast a shadow over their happiness was Thomas Garrett, the man who had abandoned Miriam. He showed up in Enid one day in late September, claiming he wanted to apologize and make things right. Miriam refused to see him, and Cade made it very clear that he was not welcome in town. Thomas tried to cause trouble, spreading lies about Miriam and claiming she owed him money, but nobody believed him. He left town within a day, his tail between his legs, and they never heard from him again. Autumn gave way to winter, and with it came new challenges and joys. Miriam's students adored her, and she proved to be a natural teacher, patient and creative and endlessly encouraging. Cade continued his work at the ranch while spending every spare moment working on clearing the land he had purchased. On Christmas Day, they exchanged simple gifts, a new hat for him, a book of poetry for her, and held each other close, grateful for the unexpected gift of finding each other. Winter turned to spring, and with the warming weather came wedding preparations. Miriam sewed her own dress this time, a simple but elegant creation in cream-colored fabric with lace at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Winters organized the ceremony, which would take place in the church with a reception afterward in the church hall. Cade bought a new suit, his first ever, and felt awkward and proud wearing it. The day of the wedding arrived on a perfect May morning in 1894, exactly 9 months after Cade had found Miriam in that abandoned wagon. The church was packed with well-wishers, ranchers and townspeople, and all of Miriam's students who had demanded to be there to see their beloved teacher get married. Cade stood at the altar, his heart pounding, waiting for his bride. When Miriam appeared at the back of the church, Cade forgot how to breathe. She was radiant, glowing with happiness, more beautiful than he had ever seen her. She walked down the aisle alone, having no family to give her away, but she held her head high and her eyes never left his face. When she reached him and took his hands, he felt like the luckiest man alive. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises to love and honor and support each other through whatever life brought their way. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and told Cade he could kiss his bride, the whole church erupted in cheers and applause. The reception was joyful and chaotic, with too much food and music and dancing. Cade's boss, Mr. Murphy, gave a speech about how Cade was the best ranch hand he had ever employed and how he was glad to see him so happy. Mrs. Winters cried through her entire speech about what a privilege it had been to watch their love story unfold. Even some of Miriam's students got up to say a few words about how much they loved their teacher. But the best moment came late in the evening, when Cade and Miriam finally had a moment alone on the church steps. The party was still going on inside, but they had slipped out for a breath of fresh air and a moment of peace. "Are you happy?" Cade asked, pulling Miriam close. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied, looking up at him with those green eyes that still had the power to make his heart skip a beat. "Do you remember what I said to you that first night when you gave me your food? You said I fed more than your hunger, that I fed your hope." I did not know then how true those words were. You did not just give me food that night, Cade. You gave me a reason to keep living. You gave me hope for a future I thought I had lost. You gave me love when I thought I would never trust anyone again. You gave me everything. Cade kissed her softly, tenderly, full of all the love he felt for this remarkable woman who had come into his life in the most unexpected way. "You gave me everything too," he whispered against her lips. "A reason to work for something more than just survival, a home to look forward to, someone to share my dreams with. You made me believe that good things can happen, even when everything seems dark." They stood there holding each other as the stars came out overhead, both of them thinking about the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. From that desperate night in August to this perfect spring evening, so much had changed, and yet the core of what they had found in each other remained the same: trust, hope, love. Inside, the party continued, but Cade and Miriam were content to stand in their own little bubble of happiness, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. The months following their wedding were some of the happiest of both their lives. They moved into a small cabin on Cade's new property, just a simple two-room structure that Cade had built with help from some of the other ranch hands. It was not much, but it was theirs, and Miriam made it into a home with curtains she sewed herself and wildflowers she picked and arranged in mason jars on the table. Miriam continued teaching through the end of the school year, and her reputation as an excellent educator grew. Parents praised her patience and creativity, and more than one struggling student blossomed under her careful attention. The school board assured her that her position was secure for as long as she wanted it. Cade continued working at the Circle J Ranch, but now he also worked his own land in the evenings and on Sundays, slowly building up a small herd of cattle and improving the property. Mr. Murphy helped him purchase his first 10 head of cattle at a fair price, and Cade's dream of being his own boss was slowly becoming reality. Their life fell into a comfortable rhythm. Cade would rise before dawn to do his work at the ranch, come home for lunch that Miriam would bring out to the fields, then work on their own land until dark. Miriam would teach during the day, prepare lessons in the evening, and help Cade with whatever needed doing on their property when she could. They were busy and tired most of the time, but they were happy, deeply and truly happy. That summer, Miriam discovered she was expecting their first child. She told Cade one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained since their wedding. She was nervous about his reaction, wondering if it was too soon, if they could afford a baby when they were still building their life together. But Cade's face lit up with pure joy. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests to be careful. "A baby," he kept saying over and over. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Miriam asked, though she could see the answer written all over his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Cade replied, kneeling down in front of her and placing his hands gently on her still flat stomach. "This is the best news you could have given me. Our family is growing." They spent the evening making plans, talking about names and what they would need to do to prepare. Cade immediately began plans to add another room to their cabin, determined that their child would have a proper nursery. Miriam worried about continuing to teach once she started showing, knowing that many schools dismissed teachers who became pregnant, married or not. But when she reluctantly approached the school board about her situation, she was pleasantly surprised by their response. They congratulated her and assured her that her job would be waiting for her when she was ready to return after the baby was born. In the meantime, they would find a temporary teacher to fill in. It was a progressive stance for the time, and Miriam was grateful for their understanding. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Miriam suffered from morning sickness in the early months that left her exhausted. Cade hovered over her constantly, worried and protective, until she finally had to sit him down and remind him that women had been having babies since the beginning of time, and she was not made of glass. As winter approached and Miriam's belly grew, the whole community rallied around them. Mrs. Winters organized a baby shower, and the women of Enid brought gifts they had made, quilts and clothes and wooden toys carved by their husbands. Miriam was overwhelmed by the generosity and support, so different from the cold rejection she had experienced from her aunt. Cade finished the addition to their cabin just as the first snow fell, creating a cozy nursery with a cradle he had built himself. Miriam lined the cradle with soft blankets and looked around the little room with satisfaction. Their child would be born into a home filled with love, and that was all that mattered. In late February of 1895, on a cold night when the wind howled around their cabin, Miriam went into labor. Cade sent for Mrs. Winters and the town's midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Ellen Thompson, and then proceeded to pace the main room of the cabin like a caged animal while the women attended to Miriam in the bedroom. The labor was long and difficult. Miriam's cries of pain tore at Cade's heart, and more than once he tried to go to her, only to be firmly turned away by Mrs. Winters, who told him he would only be in the way. He had never felt so helpless in his entire life. Finally, as dawn was breaking, the sound of a baby's cry filled the cabin. Cade froze, his heart in his throat, until Mrs. Winters emerged from the bedroom with a tired but happy smile. "You have a son," she announced. "A healthy baby boy, and Miriam is doing fine. You can go in and see them now." Cade practically ran to the bedroom. Miriam was propped up against the pillows, looking exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. When she looked up and saw him, her smile was brilliant. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Cade approached slowly, almost afraid, and looked down at the tiny face peering out from the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was waving one small fist in the air. He was perfect, absolutely perfect. "Can I hold him?" Cade asked, his voice rough with emotion. Miriam carefully transferred the baby to his arms, showing him how to support the head. Cade looked down at his son and felt tears running down his face. This tiny person, this perfect little human, was part of him and part of Miriam, created from their love. "What should we name him?" Miriam asked. They had discussed names for months but had never quite decided. Now, looking at his son's face, Cade knew exactly what felt right. "What about Samuel?" "After my father. He made mistakes, but he was a good man before the drink took him. I would like our son to carry his name." "Samuel," Miriam repeated, testing it out. "Samuel Harrison. I love it. Welcome to the world, Samuel." Little Samuel proved to be a good baby, healthy and relatively calm. He slept in stretches long enough to let his exhausted parents rest, and he nursed well, growing plumper and stronger every day. Cade was completely besotted with his son, spending every free moment holding him, talking to him, showing him around their property as if the infant could understand what he was seeing. Miriam recovered well from the birth, and by the time spring arrived, she was back to her usual energetic self. She decided not to return to teaching right away, wanting to spend Samuel's first year at home with him. The school board understood and wished her well, and the temporary teacher they had hired agreed to continue through the next school year. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more chaotic with a baby in the house, but rich with joy. Cade continued building their ranch, and with the extra time Miriam had at home, she was able to help more with the business side of things, keeping the books and managing the household finances. She had a good head for numbers, and under her careful management, they found they were able to save more than Cade had ever managed on his own. By the time Samuel was walking and talking, Cade and Miriam had grown their herd to 30 head of cattle, enough that Cade was able to quit his job at the Circle J and work his own ranch full-time. It was a proud day when he told Mr. Murphy he was moving on, though the older man had known it was coming and was happy for him. Miriam returned to teaching when Samuel was 2, and they arranged for Mrs. Winters to watch him during school hours. Samuel adored Mrs. Winters, calling her Grandma Addie, and she spoiled him terribly whenever she got the chance. The years passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. They had 2 more children, a daughter they named Clara in 1897 and another son they named Henry in 1899. Their ranch prospered, and they became well-respected members of the community. Cade served on the town council for a few years, and Miriam continued teaching, inspiring a generation of Enid children with her passion for learning. But through all the busyness of building a life and raising a family, Cade and Miriam never forgot what had brought them together. Every year on the anniversary of the night he found her, they would ride out to the spot where her wagon had been, just the 2 of them, and remember. They would sit under the cottonwood tree and talk about how far they had come, how grateful they were for that chance encounter that changed both their lives. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you had ridden past my wagon that night?" Miriam asked on their 10th anniversary, in 1903. Cade pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I try not to think about it. The idea of a world where I never met you, where I never had our children, where I spent my whole life alone, that is too sad to contemplate." "I would have died," Miriam said simply. "I had nothing left. No strength, no hope. You saved my life, Cade." "And you saved mine," he replied. "I was just going through the motions before I met you, working, saving money, but for what? I had no purpose beyond survival. You gave me a reason to build something, to dream bigger. You gave me a family, a home, a life worth living." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the Oklahoma sky in shades of orange and gold. In the distance, they could see their ranch, the expanded house, the barn Cade had built 2 years ago, the cattle grazing peacefully in the fields. It was everything they had worked for, everything they had dreamed of during those early days when they were just starting out with nothing but love and determination. "You fed more than my hunger that night," Miriam said softly, repeating the words she had spoken so long ago. "You fed my soul. You gave me back myself. I was so lost, so broken, and you made me whole again." "We made each other whole," Cade corrected gently. "That is what love does. It takes 2 incomplete people and creates something greater than the sum of its parts." As the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to appear, they rode back home together, side by side, just as they had faced everything else in their marriage. Their children were waiting for them, along with a warm supper and the comfortable chaos of family life. But for just a few moments longer, they savored the quiet, the peace, the bone-deep satisfaction of knowing they had built something lasting and true. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also steady growth and deepening love. Samuel grew into a strong, responsible young man who loved working the ranch with his father. Clara inherited her mother's love of learning and announced at age 12, that she wanted to be a teacher like Miriam. Henry was the wild one, always getting into mischief, but with a heart of gold that got him out of trouble as often as his antics got him into it. Cade and Miriam grew older together, their faces lined with the marks of a life lived fully, their bodies shaped by hard work and the passage of time. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger, deeper, more profound with each passing year. They had weathered droughts and hard winters, cattle diseases and economic downturns, family illness and the normal struggles of raising children. Through it all, they had stood together, united in their commitment to each other and their family. In 1910, when Cade was 43 and Miriam 40, they celebrated the birth of their first grandchild, a daughter born to Samuel and his wife Emily. Holding that tiny baby girl, Cade felt the same overwhelming love and wonder he had felt when Samuel was born, and he marveled at how life had brought him to this place. Grandfather to a beautiful, healthy baby, respected rancher and pillar of the community. Husband to the woman he loved more than life itself. "We did good," he told Miriam that night as they lay in bed, exhausted but happy after the excitement of the day. "You and me, we built something good." "We did," Miriam agreed, snuggling into his side the way she had done for nearly 20 years of marriage. "And it all started with an act of kindness. You giving me your food when you were hungry yourself, you stopping when you could have ridden past. That single choice changed everything." "Best choice I ever made," Cade said firmly. "I would do it again 1,000 times over." They drifted off to sleep, comfortable in their familiar bed, in the house they had built together, on the land they had worked side by side to improve. And if an observer had looked in on them, they would have seen not just an aging couple, but two people who had found that rarest of treasures, true love, lasting love, the kind of love that endures through everything life can throw at it. As the years rolled on into the new century, as automobiles began to replace horses, and the wild frontier of their youth became tamed and settled, Cade and Miriam remained constants in Enid. They were the couple people pointed to as an example of what marriage should be, partners in the truest sense, equals who supported and cherished each other through everything. Miriam continued teaching until she was 55, retiring in 1925 after more than 30 years of educating Enid's children. Her former students were everywhere in town now, running businesses, raising families of their own, and nearly all of them credited Mrs. Harrison with inspiring their love of learning. The town threw her a retirement party that was attended by hundreds of people, and the mayor gave a speech thanking her for her decades of service. Cade, meanwhile, had passed the day-to-day operation of the ranch to Samuel, though he still helped out whenever he could. He spent his time spoiling his grandchildren, and eventually his great-grandchildren, and working on small projects around the property. He also wrote down the story of how he met Miriam, at the urging of his children, so that future generations would know how their family began. In 1932, as the country struggled through the Great Depression, Cade and Miriam celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren gathered for a party at the ranch, now a substantial operation that provided employment for several families in the area. Looking around at all the faces, all the people who existed because he had stopped to check an abandoned wagon 40 years ago, Cade was humbled and grateful. During the party, Clara asked her parents to tell the story of how they met, as she had heard it 100 times but never tired of it. Cade and Miriam looked at each other and smiled, the kind of smile that comes from decades of shared memories and deep understanding. "It was August of 1893, Cade began, his voice still strong despite his 70 years. I was riding home from work, tired and hungry and thinking about nothing but supper and bed. And then I saw this wagon, all alone by a cottonwood tree, and something told me to stop. I was so scared. Miriam picked up the story, her green eyes still bright despite the white that now threaded through her auburn hair. I had been there for days with no food or water, and I thought I was going to die. But then this cowboy appeared, and the first thing he did was give me his food. His only food. He was hungry too, but he gave it to me without hesitation. "You told me I fed more than your hunger," Cade said softly, taking her hand. "That I fed your hope, but what you did not know was that you fed mine too." I had been alone for so long, just drifting through life without any real purpose. And then I found you, and suddenly everything made sense. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren listened raptly, even though most of them had heard the story before. There was something magical about hearing it told by the two people who had lived it, seeing the love that still shone between them after 4 decades. "The lesson here," Miriam told the gathered family, "is that small acts of kindness can change everything. If Cade had ridden past my wagon, I would have died there. But he stopped, he helped. He gave when he had little to give, and from that one act of compassion, all of this grew." She gestured around at the family, the ranch, the life they had built. "The other lesson," Cade added with a grin that made him look decades younger, "is to never give up hope. Miriam had given up when I found her, thought her life was over. But it was not over, it was just beginning. You never know what wonderful things might be waiting around the corner, so you have to keep going, keep hoping, keep believing that good things are possible." The party continued late into the night, with food and music and laughter filling the house that had seen so much life over the years. And at the center of it all were Cade and Miriam, still holding hands, still exchanging glances that spoke of love and understanding, still grateful every single day for the chance encounter that brought them together. They lived on for many more years, watching their family grow and thrive, secure in the knowledge that they had built something lasting. When Cade passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76 in 1938, Miriam grieved deeply, but also celebrated a life well lived, and a love that had sustained her for nearly half a century. She followed him 2 years later, in the spring of 1940, passing quietly in the house they had shared for so many years. Her children found her in her favorite chair by the window, a peaceful expression on her face, as if she had simply decided it was time to join the love of her life. They buried her next to Cade on the ranch, under a cottonwood tree he had planted decades ago in memory of the night they met. The whole town turned out for the funeral, testament to the impact Miriam had made on countless lives through her teaching and her kindness. At the service, Samuel stood up to speak about his parents, and he told the story one more time, the story that had become legend in Enid, of the cowboy and the starving bride, of an act of kindness that blossomed into a lifetime of love. "My father stopped when he did not have to," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. "He gave when he had little to give. And my mother, who had lost everything, found the courage to hope again, to trust again, to love again." Together, they built not just a ranch but a legacy, a family, a testament to what is possible when two people choose to commit themselves fully to each other and to building something good in this world. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces, many of them former students of his mother, all of them touched in some way by his parents' love story. "They taught us that love is not just a feeling but an action, a choice you make every day. They taught us that kindness matters, that hope is never wasted, that even in our darkest moments, redemption and joy are possible. They taught us how to live, and they taught us how to love. And for that, we are forever grateful." As the service concluded and people began to make their way back to their lives, the family gathered around the two graves under the cottonwood tree. Clara placed flowers on both headstones, while Henry stood with his arm around his daughter. Samuel's children and grandchildren formed a circle around the graves. 3 generations gathered to honor 2 people who had started with nothing but love and determination, and built an empire of family and legacy. The wind rustled through the cottonwood leaves, and for just a moment, it seemed to whisper the words that had started it all, the words Miriam had spoken so many years ago that captured the essence of what they had found together. You fed more than my hunger. You fed my hope. And in feeding each other's hope, in choosing kindness and love and commitment every single day, Cade and Miriam Harrison had created something that would outlast them both. A family built on the foundation of 2 broken people who found each other and made each other whole. Their love story became the stuff of family legend, told and retold to each new generation. A reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion can change the course of multiple lives, rippling outward in ways we can never fully predict or measure. In the years that followed, the ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story while never forgetting the foundation on which it was all built. The house was expanded and modernized, but they kept the original 2 rooms, the cabin where it all began, preserved as a reminder of humble beginnings. The cottonwood tree under which Cade and Miriam were buried grew tall and strong, its roots deep in Oklahoma soil, its branches providing shade for family gatherings and quiet moments of reflection. And every year, on the anniversary of the night Cade found Miriam, the family would gather there to remember and to celebrate the legacy of love that continued to shape their lives. The story of the cowboy who gave his food to a starving bride, and the bride who told him he had fed more than her hunger, became more than just a family story. It became a reminder of what matters most in life: kindness, compassion, hope, and the courage to love even when you have been hurt before. It became a testament to the power of a single choice, a single moment of generosity, to change not just one life but many lives, rippling outward through time in ways that continue to inspire and uplift. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Cade and Miriam Harrison were together still, no longer separated by the veil of death, whole and young, and as in love as they had been on that perfect May Day in 1894 when they promised to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. A promise they kept, fully and completely, until the very end and beyond. Their story, born in desperation and kindness, nurtured through hard work and devotion, proven through 4 decades of partnership and love, stood as proof that fairy tales do not just exist in books. They exist in the real lives of real people who choose to create them through acts of courage and compassion and unwavering commitment to each other. And that, perhaps, is the greatest legacy of all.